Hello, everyone, and welcome to Startup Canada Live, Startup Foundation. Today is Thursday, June 8th. My name is Media Sheikh Hassan. I'm a co-founder and CEO at Canny Vision, virtual reality training platform. Startup Canada is a national rally community and a voice for Canada's entrepreneurship community.
Hi, my name is Akila Samani, and my goal is that Canada has vibrant startup communities. So I'm volunteering or working for Startup Canada, and Media and I will be your hosts today. We're live here at the Startup Canada national offices in Ottawa, Ontario, and we're broadcasting from cubicles, co-working spaces, incubators, and startup communities across Canada.
Every Thursday on Startup Canada Live, we discuss topics relevant to Canada's startup community, scale-up, and small business community as well. We feature expert guests to provide insight into funding, growing, and scaling successful ventures. Startup Canada Live is streamed live through Periscope and Facebook Live for easy viewing whenever you are via our friends at restream.io. Startup Canada Live is brought to you by Intuit QuickBooks, Canada's leading provider for businesses, financial and tax management solution for SMEs. By Mastercard, whenever you need a card for purchase or you need a payment solution to help you better manage and track expenses, Mastercard has the right solution for you. Have you nominated or applied for the 2017 Startup Canada Awards? Apply now on the 17th award region by June 16th.
So today's Startup Live topic is growing up, scaling your startup. We're joined by two very special guests, Edwin Ferndozo. Edwin is the host of business leadership podcast, Startup Chats, as well as marketing and growth at Single Shot, VoIP. Edwin is a passionate supporter of entrepreneurship and SMEs and helps them grow and scale in the cloud by enabling them with simple tools to communicate. Also with us today is Tanya Beamers, Chief Financial Officer at Buse All Natural. Tanya is a chartered professional accountant, CA designate, and has been with Bures and has been with Bures since 2006. Bures is a brewing company that started off in 2006 with 6 people and grew to a 150 people organization. She's also part of the Rwandan Craft Beer Project, which is a women-owned and well-operated venture in partnership with Bures Brewery. Welcome to you both, and thank you for joining us today.
To those who are tuning in, you can ask any question at any time using hashtag StartupLive on Twitter or by commenting on Facebook Live videos. So to start off, I have a sort of a general question that matches the theme of today's talk. To our guests in the show, what does a scale-up mean to you, and why is it important for startups?
Maybe, Edwin, you want to start off with that?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So the question in terms of what is scale-up, and what does it mean, and why is it important? To me, I think scale-up is the point where your business is already catching traction. We're not talking about finding an MVP when you first think of a product and looking for your first couple of customers, but we're talking about where you've probably sold this product tens of times or hundreds of times, and you're looking to scale and really grow 5x, 10x, 20x in terms of revenue. And you need to put systems in place. It's very important for startups and entrepreneurs to think about scaling up from the inception, so they put things in place at the beginning rather than pushing back and redoing things when you're ready to scale up, which might slow things down at that point.
Okay. Tanya, when does scaling normally happen for you, or when do you think it should happen? And should startups have scaling on the horizon from the very beginning or the early stages, or should they kind of think about it a little later when they've solidified everything?
Yeah, so I think scaling up really depends on where your business is at a moment in time, and it's very different for different businesses. Sometimes if you see rapid growth in the first couple of years and you realize I've got a product hit in my hands, I need to grow this business pretty quickly, then you need to get, the resources, the HR, the people, the financing in place to really move things forward. If you see a stagnating, you're not seeing the sales take off initially as you projected, then maybe it's not about scaling. Maybe it's about, do I need to look at product enhancement? Do I need to look at other things as opposed to, growing immediately the business? So it's very, company specific. And, you need to determine, the key point is recognizing at that, what point you do need to start thinking bigger.
So 2 different answers. That's really interesting. Edwin's from the very beginning, and Tanya, you're like when your company's ready and you're ready to grow.
So I guess the next question kind of talks about the models that entrepreneurs can use when they consider scaling up their business. Do you have any suggestion on what models or the different models that exist for scaling?
I think that's a difficult question. And when I think about models, when it talk about scaling and business, I think about revenue models. And in our world, being a SaaS company where there's revenue, it's easy to think about scaling the number of customers or versus scaling the number of clients. I know for other startups, other business models, it could be on a consulting type basis and thinking about how to scale that model when it comes to professional services, to the amount of hours. Now we're scaling the amount of people, the amount of person or hours that we could actually grow revenue as well. So that's sort of what I think in terms of scaling models. I mean, in terms of technology, I would probably start looking at how do you automate some of the systems that will help you do that, whether it's in the financial services side or the financial vertical or within marketing or in engineering as well. So it's a very difficult question in terms of, I'm not too sure if I'm even answering the right answer, but I think it depends where you're looking at in terms of the business at this point.
Tanya, do you have any inputs as well into the models of scaling?
One thing I would think about is you could, look at it from a model perspective, being proactive or being reactive. So from a proactive perspective, you can look at really thinking about, laying out your business plan for growth and really thinking about, what you need to put into place versus reactive, saying, oh my goodness, here I'm in this situation and what do I do next? So that's sort of another way to look at it as well.
Okay. So do you guys think it's possible to just scale part of your business and keep everything the same? And if you're doing that, how would that happen? Or do you have to scale everything at the same time? Maybe, Edwin, you can start off with that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think ultimately in the ideal world, when you're scaling one part of the business, everything needs to scale. Otherwise, things might get top heavy, for example. So if you start scaling marketing and sales, or marketing as an example, and I may say, you know what, we need to spend X amount of dollars to increase our sales. So we throw all the available resources into marketing. What may or may not happen is marketing does a great job, but if you don't have your sales processes in place or you didn't scale the amount of resources that you have to take those calls, you'll probably break the system. You'll lose a lot of money. You'll lose a lot of opportunities. So, I mean, that's just an example in terms of scaling one part of the inbound part. It's very hard for business owners to think about scaling infrastructure upfront, putting that capital expense up front to say, okay, you know what, we need support systems in place. But how does that help us create business? But it may not help create business, but it help retain the customers that are coming in as well. So I think it all has to come at the same time. But being an entrepreneur and knowing who might be listening to us today, they might be on the startup side, and I could be overwhelming them. But ultimately, you're really changing hats really quickly, and as an entrepreneur, you're really scaling yourself in terms of the knowledge and where you need to put your time. So. Well, again, it's a very difficult question in terms of scaling, but I guess ultimately you want to scale the expertise that are in-house to help you grow as fast as you can.
Okay, so I know, Tanya, you have like a physical product that you distribute around the country, and So it's a little different for you. So can you scale just one part of your business, or do you have to scale everything?
Yeah, and Edwin's response was very good in terms of, first and foremost, I'm, thinking as a numbers person, I'm always thinking about sales. So, you've got to be very conscientious about not scaling some of those support services for sales to actually grow your revenue without thinking about that top line growth as well. And because if it really, that bottom line, if you don't have sales, you don't have anything. And that's a key, piece that you have to have. There are absolutely, I think we've scaled different parts of our businesses at different times. Bose distributes beer across the country, absolutely. We're distributing ourselves in Ontario, and one of the things we started out with was actually growing, starting the sales, but then growing the distribution of it, and taking it back from third parties, looking at the cost effectiveness of that. So that was sort of one. Scaling up our distribution was one thing we did after sort of starting to see that revenue growth. One thing we actually did this year as well is we've spent some time sort of growing our HR side of the business. So not to a very extensive amount from a cost perspective, but really saying, what are our valuable resources, our people, and, building up the team to support those so that they can actually, push forward our growth plan was, another way that we sort of scaled just at a departmental level.
Okay, so it might be different depending on your situation then. And like a physical product could be very different from a service.
Of course,
yeah.
How can entrepreneurs prepare to scale? Are there any steps or consideration that they should take before actually deciding on scaling up?
Did you want me? Want me to go ahead?
Yeah,
or?
of course.
Sure. Yeah. I'll start with the numbers, because that to me is sort of from when you start thinking about scaling, you really need to understand, what the costs are involved in that, what's your expected revenue, what's your expected expenses, and what you're going to have to outlay from the capital. Because one of the key pieces is understanding what you need from a financing perspective to actually scale up.
I guess for me, in terms of how entrepreneurs or startups could prepare to scale, and I use this example a lot when I talk with new entrepreneurs, I always say the magic number is 3. As an entrepreneur, you're gonna have to learn everything yourself. So you're gonna start something, you're gonna figure out how to do it, and then the second time around it'll probably be much easier because it's your second time around. So whether it's learning how to get onto social media, right, or how to log in something into a CRM, or how to bill a customer. So the second time will be super easy. And I always say on the third time, you should probably write down a simple process. And it's probably the not most efficient way to do it, but you're going to write down, I launched our billing system, and I put in the client, and I mailed it out, and we got paid, and I deposited it to this. I mean, that's a lot of work for an entrepreneur, but that's definitely one process that's been written down that you won't have to think about later, and it'll be easier to fill in that resource when you have when you're able to hire people. There's already a process, and they'll look to make it efficient as well. So that's usually what I talk about, and maybe that's the way I think as being an engineer as well. I think about writing things down, creating it, and you're going to reiterate it anyways, and it'll be easier to scale as soon as you write everything down.
So I guess it's a sort of a systematic approach into scaling. There's no right recipe, but you have to build that recipe.
And build that continuity within the company so that you can pass it on. So
I mean, ultimately, just sorry to interrupt.
Yeah, that's fine.
I was talking with someone recently about this, and it was actually on my podcast, and he was saying, as the entrepreneur, I had to learn everything. And I might not be the best person. I might be level 1, but at least the next person I hire will be level 2. 3 or 4, but you still have to learn the job, and you got to really start that process and make it easy for the next person, because if you hire someone, you don't want them to figure out how to do it. You want to teach them something, right? So
that podcast is Startup Chats, so check it out. I think it drops every Tuesday, right? Okay.
Yeah, it's the Business Leadership Podcast.
Okay. So you're talking about bringing that person in and, letting them take on the process. But how do you know when those positions are obsolete and when you have to move on and create new positions or new roles within the company? And maybe Tanya, you can answer that because...
Sure. Well, we've been growing like crazy, so we definitely know when we need to add people. But, I do think Edwin made a good point in terms of processes and understanding your processes, because if you understand the processes and the value that somebody is providing in that process, it's much easier to determine, is this position obsolete or not? If, how integral are they? What value is there, in their position? And also looking at it, more compartmentalized from a, department perspective, and understanding, metrics on, okay, as I scale up, I should have X amount of people in my sales department. And if I have Y, does it make sense based on, the incremental revenue growth? So I do think, understanding the numbers and understanding the process can help you identify where those and what positions can be potentially obsolete.
And so it's a difficult thing, I guess, but it has to be done.
Difficult thing, yeah. And the same goes with hiring. You need to look at, what do we currently have from a resource perspective? Do we have skill gaps? So that's a very important piece. Doing skill gap assessments, within the organization and within the departments is very important to understand, are there critical areas where we are missing out, either from a revenue perspective, from an efficiency perspective, from marketing perspective, because we don't have those right resources in place. So it's understanding, that piece, and then figuring out what holes need to be filled.
So I think that leads right into what you wanted to know.
Questions I want to ask. So there's this saying that you should hire slowly and fire quickly. Does that go into the process of hiring the right resources? And how do you know that you need to hire more employees, or how do you kind of discover the process of hiring new staff?
Yeah, I could start. This is just to go further on what I was talking about in starting, and I'm really thinking from a startup to growing your business. Is as soon as you start doing these processes as an entrepreneur, you have 53 things to do in a day, right? And if billing one of your customers and you have that process down takes you 10 minutes, and now you're doing that 20 minutes a day, 50 minutes a day, and your sales is falling off, I think it's ultimately, where do you find value for yourself? Where should you be as the entrepreneur? Should I be billing customers and calling them to pay me, or should I be out on Startup Live talking to people across the interweb? So it's really understanding the value where you need to put yourself. I think that's really important, and it really keeps you conscious of the time and the value in each role. Like, how do you know what you're going to bring in, how you're going to replace yourself? Because ultimately, you're looking to duplicate yourself as an entrepreneur.
Yeah. No, that I absolutely agree with that. If you're sort of sitting there doing the mundane tasks, you're not giving the company the value, right? Like, you're not out there working on financing and being the public figure of the company and all of those types of things. There's a certain point where you need that succession as you're trying to scale up. You can't be jack of all trades for everything. That's not where the value lies.
So I think that kind of leads into my next question is, you don't want to be doing everything as the entrepreneur, and you want to kind of let others take on those roles. But what can you do to automate tasks to make everything simpler and create some efficiency while you're scaling?
Yeah, so I can start maybe with that one. So it's very important, me being an accountant, we like to have systems in place. So a very easy way from an automation perspective is to look at, how you need to actually record and transact items for your business. So that's a very important piece. And then also any type of sales support programs that you need to have in place that can sort of a CRM system or something like that is an invaluable tool as you sort of scale up your business as well. So, what are those key things that are taking, massive amounts of time because, you don't have the IT infrastructure, and sort of start ticking those off in terms of, here's a process where it can be automated by an accounting system and I can suddenly save 3 hours a day, as Edwin alluded to, not invoicing, but, invoicing manually, but having a system do it. So those types of, automation tools are great.
Okay. Edwin?
I mean, I think she said everything. I mean, ultimately, I'm probably going to reiterate everything I say. And if you remember anything that I say today, it's probably the focus on process. Any automation starts with process, and it doesn't matter what solution is out there. I mean, we live in a very interesting time where there's a solution for everything, but understanding your business processes doesn't come from anyone or any vendor or any consultant for that matter. It should come from internally. So just process. That's all I got.
Okay. Agree.
Tanya, what are some of the risks involved in scaling, and is there a way to mitigate some of these risks?
Planning, I think, is super important. So I mentioned, reactive versus proactive. And I think, understanding your business, understanding the numbers, and, how you can see your growth pattern moving forward is super important, so you can mitigate some of the risks. What am I spending on operating expenses? What am I spending to manufacture my product? What is my sales backlog as I sort of scale up and grow my business? So those are key things that, if you can see down the, my potential sales in the next 3 months are, 20,000 lower than projected, I can mitigate that risk by, maybe not hiring maybe not hiring that new second salesperson as I try to scale up. So it's really, making sure you're thinking about and looking at the numbers and understanding where your business is going. And getting good advice is important as well.
Okay.
If I could just add something, and maybe Tanya could chime in this. One of the risks is scaling, and what I've been learning a lot, talking to a lot of business leaders, is losing that culture, that startup culture that you had when you were under 50 employees or under 100 employees. I know you mentioned, Tanya, you're at 150. Like, what is the risk? Has the culture changed now since you've grown that big?
Yeah, and that's actually a very interesting question, because in 2 weeks, we actually have a culture ambassador starting. So a totally new role for Bose. And I think the culture, as you scale up, is very hard to maintain. One of the things we did at Bose is we're working on selling the brewery to the employees. So that's been a big piece of, making sure that the culture is maintained. But it's that sense of we're all in it together. It's, making sure that from a decision-making process, that people are involved in that and feel that they're that they can help help the business succeed in a granular way, I think is a key piece. So and what we're looking at, we're actually very good when you talk about process. We're looking at our processes both from an internal and external customer perspective. The culture ambassador will be doing that to understand, those touch points and what's happening and how it's happening and how it should be happening, to improve both, from an internal and external customer perspective, which, an internal perspective is all about culture.
Okay.
Thank you.
So I want to go back a little bit to what Tanya was talking about and growth patterns. So if you're evaluating those growth patterns and you see that you're not really growing, should you take a step back, or should you pivot to a different direction, or keep on pushing forward? And what are the options? And maybe Tanya, you can start with that one.
Sure. Yeah, and again, I think it all depends on sort of where you are and what options there are to you in terms of your business model as well. So, if you're just seeing sort of a stagnation of your product, then, what do I need to do to sort of elevate it? Does it make sense? Is it becoming obsolete? Do I need to, tweak or change my model of what I'm selling? So it's very dependent on sort of a business situation, and you want to be careful that you're not, going down the path of, okay, well, you know what, even if I don't see sales, materializing, I'm still going to move down that path. And sort of that can become problematic if, you're sort of, spending without necessarily realizing any revenue out of it. But it also, if you believe in your product, if you have good support, and maybe there's just a couple hurdles that you need to get over, then maybe it does make sense to move forward. So it's very dependent on the business and what you can see from a future perspective.
Was there anything that you noted while you guys were growing from 7 people to 150 people that you kind of had to tweak and change along the way?
Well, I've been here for the past couple of years, so I've seen significant growth just in those years. I think, from the beginning, there's been a lot of, rejigging and changing. How do we deal with customers, and what type of workforce do we want to have? And, even from a distribution perspective, taking on the distribution on our own has been, another way for us to be face to face with the customer. So there's a lot of those things that as the business has sort of expanded, we've sort of looked at, should we do A or B? And, ultimately, if A is, that's great. If B hasn't, then okay, we now need to regroup, and maybe it's C, or maybe we go back to A. So.
Okay, that's good advice. Yeah. Maybe we should ask Edwin. So if you don't see growth, what should you do?
I mean, that's a huge challenge, I think. And it really, just to reiterate, Tanya, it really depends on the business. But if I were very specific in terms of growth, if I'm going to take growth as you're a startup, I mean, the challenge is any startup or any business is get that first customer. Okay, they'll prove you know how to sell, or you have something good. But can you scale? Can you 10x that? Can you get to 10 customers? Mm-hmm. If you could get to 10 customers, you might have something on there, but it might stagnate, and you may not know your product fit or who your client is at that point. So the challenge to scale. So I like to think of scaling in bite sizes. So if you're at 10 customers, you might want to get, okay, how do we get to 100 customers? What do we need to do to scale to 100 customers? And that's where the pivoting may happen, right? I mean, I'm not to say it's easy, but to get 10 customers, it might be all your friends. Like, hey, sign up to my thing, and I got 10 customers, and you feel amazing at that point, and you think you're onto the next $1 billion deal. But I mean, you'll see the challenge to get 100 customers, and then to 10x 100 customers to get to 1,000 customers. So there's going to be a lot of rejigging, but ultimately, if you can't sell that first customer, first 10 customers, first 100 customers, you're definitely looking to rejig. But I mean, having said that, if you're at the tens of thousand customers, and you're looking to scale to 100,000 customers, now you're looking at probably feature upgrades, or what else could we do, strategic partnerships, how do we get to different distribution models, like maybe Tanya's looking at it as well, and how do we do it that way? So, I mean, just knowing that we're like on Startup Live, I try to put it towards like how do we scale to 100 customers? It might be a big challenge still for a lot of people who are listening, right? So
and that's a very good point. And in my past life, I dealt with a lot of startups as well. And if you're slogging away one person, and 3 years down the road, you're still not you're at customer 98, then okay, I do have to pivot. So it's really sort of looking, sitting back and where am I and where should I actually be at this time.
So listening to the both advice that you both gave, all I could think about is that the systematic approach to scaling actually costs money. So are there any financial supports that startup can access to help with the scaling up process?
I would let Tanya answer this. She's she's the CFO.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there are a lot of programs from a federal, provincial, and even municipal perspective that you can get funding. When you're in your R&D phase, there's definitely research and development funding through the Canada Revenue Agency. There's IRAP funding, so that's through the National Research Council, which is a great way to get funding for HR. for HR needs. We've had a lot of success with the BDC, but obviously when you're smaller, typically you're also, there's also the potential for venture funds and other areas and avenues where there is a potential for funding as well. But yeah, there's a lot of government programs out there. It does take a while to look and to find, what you need. But there's also a lot of good government resources out there that can help you navigate through that stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, and just to add on, and you could always look for strategic partners through the VC channels as well, right? So finding people who might fill in a gap in terms of your partnerships and will help you scale as well, opening yourself up to their network as well. So you can look at it that avenue as well.
Yeah, so from a scaling and a startup perspective, network is, a key place that it's amazing what you're able to find if you're at, a couple network events a week. You suddenly meet somebody that gives you a clear in, whether it be to a, potential sales channel or a potential partner or a potential funder. It's, you need to be out there in the business world.
Okay, so you've started growing, you got money. What is the right rate of growth? Like, how do you know if you're growing too fast, too slow, or you're growing too far, or you're not doing enough? And what's like the danger of moving like way too fast? So a lot of companies, all they want is growth. But how do you know if that's right for you? And maybe I'll ask Edwin that question.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. It's very difficult, but I mean, if I was to simplify, moving too fast or moving too slow, I think Tanya alluded to you're in year 3 and you're still at 98 customers or something like that, and you're inbound. You haven't figured out your inbound marketing, or you haven't figured out your clients. You're probably moving too slow. I mean, you have a product that people like if you're at that number, but you're not growing as fast as you think you should, or even if you compare yourself to competitors, there's something wrong, and it might be a system in place. It could be something internally, it could be something externally that you're doing wrong. I think moving too fast, I mean, it'd probably be a good problem to be in. I mean, the bad problem would be that you're losing a lot of opportunities, and worst case is you might start losing trust. If you're not able to deliver what you're saying you're doing, you're dropping the ball, customers are upset. So I think once you're not able to contact all the leads or all the opportunities that come in, you're probably moving too fast, and you got to either step back or hire the resources and train them real quickly, which probably takes a lot more time than just me saying that. So I think that's the oversimplified version, I think.
Yeah, and I personally have dealt with that where we had a lot of customers, but we just didn't have the infrastructure to support that. So it is hard growing. Sometimes you just get too much traction because it's a really good product or the technology is really interesting, but you kind of have to slow your growth pace at that point. Tanya, do you want to talk about your experience with growing at Brewers?
Yeah, I would echo sort of Edwin in terms of the growth. Like the key piece is when, you're growing at 50% or whatever from a revenue perspective, but you're not able to continue satisfying the customer's demands. That's actually a much worse situation because you're potentially harming future revenues as well, because all of a sudden, those customers are dropping off. Won't be buying now and won't be buying in the future. So very important to understand what resources and processes you have to put into place to really meet that from a scaling perspective. Yeah, and from Beau's perspective, we're much past the startup phase now, but in startup it's the same thing. When you're a small 5-person operation, trying to scale up appropriately so you can sort of match or exceed a little bit demand is where you want to be. So it's really thinking about and understanding your market, and what the customer is asking for and getting, and sort of your forecasted needs on a shorter term and longer term basis.
So Tanya, you guys are based in Ontario and you're now
Yes.
across the country.
Yeah.
Like, what about moving too far? Did you guys take little steps to get to across Canada, or do you have the goal, we're going to be across Canada now? And do you have plans to grow?
Yeah, so we actually thought about it quite a bit, but we didn't do it in a way that we have now 5 breweries across the country. We scaled it up where we're distributing through third parties across, helping third parties in the other provinces across the country. And then we added our own staff on as well across the country that are brand ambassadors that can help, with our brand recognition and selling. So we've sort of done it in a, not a, okay, we're going to add 20 people all across Canada. We're sort of scaling it up and then seeing where the results are, and then going to be able to pivot. Okay, is this province, do we see a need now for another person because our revenue growth is moving faster than anticipated, and that's where adding in that other resource would make sense at a certain point. So we did it much more systematic, I think, and more sort of process oriented.
So always look at results and make sure you have the infrastructure to support, and make sure you're satisfying your customer and you're delivering to them. I think those are all really good points that came out of that discussion.
Yeah. I would just like to remind our listeners, if you would like to ask a question, just include #StartupLife in your question. Edwin, I have a question for you. Since mentorship plays a big role in the success of startups, when scaling up, is there any specific resources to mentorship, or what should we look in a mentor to help us in a scaling up process?
That's a great question. I mean, I think mentors play a huge role for entrepreneurs who are approaching that stage of scaling, because you need someone who's been there and done that, who's able to scale their company or to 10x it or whatnot. And I think the question you had was, how does it help, or was it how do you find those resources?
I guess what you should look into a mentor when it comes to scaling up, and what sort of help that you need to find from them as well.
Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, 2 main things that personally I would look for a mentor. It would be that entrepreneur. First off, would be that entrepreneur mentor who's done it from a strategic side, and for the person who started it. Other mentors that I would look for are the skilled leaders, business leaders that have a lot of insight. So it could be someone who was able to build a sales organization, or someone who is effectively able to build an engineering team, and how did he grow that, and how did he scale that development team. So these are mentors as well that you can look at, and these are people that you probably want internally as well as you grow and you scale, because you're going to want to hire amazing people to help you grow and scale that company. I mean, being the entrepreneur, you have the vision, but you're definitely not an expert in everything. And Tanya said that you just can't be a jack of all trades. Yes, as an entrepreneur, you do everything, but you're not an expert in nearly any of those departments. So I would be looking for experts in different verticals within the business units, and also peers when it comes to entrepreneurs. Guys, people who've done it, who've been there, and ultimately, ideally though, just to add to that, you probably want to find someone told me this, who's either 3 to 6 months ahead of you as well. So someone who's a lot closer to your level as well, because talking to someone who's already exited 3 companies, they probably forgot what it's like where you are at this point. So
that is a very, very good point.
Yeah, that's absolutely key, is somebody that's, when you're scaling up and growing further, that resource that's been there, done that in a big way is helpful. But if you have somebody that's 6 months, a year ahead of you, that's super helpful. And resources in terms of accountants and lawyers and all of those resources are very key as well, because oftentimes, from an accountant, they've seen, 10 different startups scale up as well. So they can help you with the pitfalls, do introductions, and make sure you're on the right track.
Okay, thanks. So with that, we're moving on to the QA segment of our show. As Media said, you can simply ask questions by including the hashtag StartupLive on Twitter or Facebook. So I know we have a few Twitter questions already for us. So one's from Renee Tavares. How can you empower your employees to step up and scale with the company? So maybe I think we should ask Edwin that question, and then we'll move on to Tanya.
Yeah, so the question, just to make sure, is how do you empower your people to help you scale up? I mean, really trusting them with key parts of your business, and really just giving them the keys and the guidance and the freedom to be creative with what they're doing. I mean, albeit ensure that they're in the job that they want to be, first off, and really understand where they want to go as well and grow with you. And that's something that was the concern when you scale too fast, was that culture. Because when you're a small team, you're able to really uphold this culture. And I know, Tanya, I mean, you guys are bringing in that culture person. So it's to ensure that people will help you grow and really want to be there and be happy and really wear your flag. I think it all comes down to trust and freedom.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the other thing I would say for sure is communication. So, communicating vision and the plan and where you see things going, empowers people to, take on those areas of the business where they're the experts and really help move that agenda forward. And then they feel more a part of it.
Thank you. I believe we have a second question. How can a startup on a budget upscale their employees to scale? So I guess, Edwin, do you want to start with the question?
So how does a company scale on a budget?
Yes.
And teach the right skills to do that.
I mean, it's ultimately the traits that I talk about a lot. I mean, I would try to instill sort of the knowledge in my business practices in terms of what I do. And if it's my founding team, for example, or first hires or people close to the beginning, I'm really teaching them and hoping to teach them to be a leader as well. Because if you're scaling and your vision is to grow to this big organization, you want to bring these key people who helped you. You want them to move up, and I'm sure they want to move up with you as well. As long as you're a leader, a business leader, an entrepreneur that people could follow and instill that trust in. So I think as a budget and really being bootstrapped, for example, and you're really you're really on a shoestring budget, I think you really have to be leading these people passionately and really trust them and let them go with it. Don't overly manage them at all.
Okay. Tanya?
Yeah, and then one other thing would be just for your people that are working with you to understand, have a sense of financial literacy and understand sort of the big picture and the numbers. And okay, well, if we sell X amount of beer, here's how many people we would be hiring to support that. So really getting them to sort of see how that infrastructure is can grow based on the revenue. And that I would say is the biggest piece for the employees is understanding that and how the budget is impacted.
Is that just to add, Tanya? Is that why at the organization now you're trying to get all the employees to be owners as well? So there's a little profit sharing there.
Oh yeah, well. No, actually, well, maybe, yes. I think, ultimately the goal with that is, we'd like nothing better than people to leave, 10 years down the road, having contributed to the success of the business and leaving with more money in their pocket, right? As shareholder, owner, employee, that's a great feeling for sure. Oh, yes.
So remember, you can ask questions using the hashtag StartupLive. And with that, I think we have one more question. This is from at SLISK92. As you're scaling, you're hiring more people. Can this onboarding take too much time and you end up slowing down? And maybe, Tanya, you can start on with that because I know you've onboarded 150 employees. So
no, that's an interesting question, actually. I think that it's super important that onboarding is done right. And that, the people are given, I think what's a key piece is that people are given the appropriate training when they onboard. Because ultimately, if you say, oh, you know what, we're going to add in, we now have room for 2 salespeople, right? Mm-hmm. Out of our company of 5, we're going to add 2 salespeople. And you don't get them to understand the product and how they need to sell it and what it means and what the company means and all of those sort of integral pieces of the business and the vision and all of those types of things, then I think you're doing a disservice to the business and to those new employees because you're not giving them the tools to actually succeed. So there's a right amount of time, but you also don't want to be sitting there 4 months, 5 months, 6 months later still saying, okay, well, they don't know how to do this and they don't know how to do this. So it's definitely, making sure that critical roles are ramped up quickly, but with the appropriate amount of knowledge.
Okay. Do we have any other questions via Twitter? No? So I'm going to ask something. How do you know you're doing a good job and that you have actually scaled properly and that you're successful? Maybe, Edwin, you could note that or answer that.
Well, I mean, that's I think I'm asking that myself right now.
Okay.
But I think ultimately, it's that vision that you grow, and in my mind, it's when you're doing less and less of the job, and you're becoming more and more the face of the company, and you're just going to meetings after meetings after meetings, and business as usual. Things are still happening. Bills are getting paid, people are happy, people are taking their lunches. I think if you have people looking at you and happily employed by you and looking at you as a team, I think you're a success, right? But it's being an entrepreneur, you're always thinking how much more or how much better can we be, or you're looking over your shoulder like, oh, maybe we should do that. So I think it's really just take a step back and really really enjoy being an entrepreneur, to be quite honest.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Tanya? Do you have any inputs?
Yeah, no, I definitely would agree with what Edwin said, right? It's sort of taking a step back and looking at, where you are and ultimately, what you've achieved. And I do agree, happy employees, if you have a happy workforce and a great product and, you have, a great vision and, you're doing some social impact, you're doing all really good things.
Thank you so much. So with this, we're nearing the end of our discussion on growing and scaling up your startup. Before we do you guys have any sort of closing remarks, comments, or stories to share with us and with the listeners?
Maybe you can go, Edwin.
Yeah, no, sure. I mean, the only closing remark I have is follow me on Twitter, but I also very passionate about this business leadership. It's something that I'm continually learning to do as an entrepreneur and looking to scale. I actually did launch a podcast this year called the Business Leadership Podcast, and it's really learning from all these business leaders, both from entrepreneurs and executives, how they've grown and what they learned and how they grow their team, how do they keep people happy, and how do they do that. It's something that I continually want to learn from, and that's probably okay. And it will help the business scale as well. So that's something I'm learning and I'm sharing as well to people who are listening.
So Edwin, how can we learn about your podcast? Like, what's your website? When is it?
Businessleadership.com.
Okay.
Businessleadership.com.
And when does it drop?
Every Tuesday.
Every Tuesday. Okay. So, wow, you have 2 podcasts going on.
What about you, Tanya? Do you have any closing remarks?
Yeah, I would say, get connected. It's important when you're an entrepreneur and you're trying to scale your business. Have the right people, surround yourself with the right people, whether that's, your first employees or resources that you can turn to with business questions and concerns. Understand your business now, financially, and where you want to be 5 years down the road.
Well, thank you so
And
much.
good luck.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Sally and Edwin. It's a great conversation, and you're both amazing. Join us next Thursday, June 15th, when we discuss Disrupting Dinosaurs, Financing for Startup with Sean Berkey from Front Fund DR. You can register for this event and more events at startupcan.ca/events.
You can also stay informed on all the latest opportunities, announcements, and entrepreneur events by following Startup Canada on Twitter, liking us on Facebook, and following us on Instagram. A new startup podcast drops every Tuesday and on iTunes, and Startup Canada Live is here on Periscope, Facebook Live, and EventStream every Thursday from 12 to 1 Eastern Standard Time. Make sure you apply to nominate for the Startup Canada Awards. The deadline is June 16th. Don't miss it. We want every entrepreneur to have a chance to win one of 17 awards in each of the 7 regions across Canada. To everyone joining us today, the entrepreneurs, the startup community leaders, the broadcast viewers, thank you for having us, and have an enterprising week. Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.